Hey everyone, have you seen the Wellbeing Performance Matrix before? I love this model as a visual map of the ebbs and flows of our energy as humans, and as a really important reminder of why the way that we operate in organisations needs to be built in a sustainable way around this very crucial part of our humanness. So let's get into it. So if we consider on the y-axis, from low to high, we have well-being. And then on the x-axis, we have from low to high, performance. And then within this model, we then have 4 different zones, 4 different energy spaces present within this model. And it's a fluid model, right? So we move around as life happens to us and around us. We move around the different zones all the time. And when I run a workshop on this in organisations, and the last team that I ran this with, I asked them to self-reflect on what energy space did they think that they belonged to at that particular point in time. And we did this anonymously, we did this with the help of Mentimeter, and published the results live in the session. So what happened with that is that 70% of people said that they were in this space, the space of churning. Now, this space represents what it feels like to be on that treadmill of never-ending work, feeling like you're giving everything performance-wise, totally working at your optimum flat out, but you're tired, you're getting tired, and it doesn't seem like the end of the work is ever in sight. And within this section, I want to talk about what are some of the tactics that can be accessible for people or deployed in organisations that will help shift people away from this zone. Because the risk of people being in this zone for too long is that you slip back into this space, which is, let's call it the quicksand. And it's the space of sinking. And actually 15% of the team that I worked with most recently said that they were already there. So the risk of constantly operating on a high churn level means that if we're there for too long, we risk a burnout and we risk becoming exhausted. Performance decreases and we slide backwards into the sand and we can get stuck there. So let's stay on churning for a moment and think about what are some of the tactics that can be deployed. And so I think the main tactic here is going to be around time management. So time management tactics can be deployed on both a personal level, but they can also be deployed at an organisational level from leadership. So really what I'm going to talk about with these tactics, I'm going to put on pink sticky notes, what are things that we can do as individuals, and on these green sticky notes, what are some of the things that the employer side really need to think about? What does leadership need to be looking at within this space? So I think on an individual level, the obvious one that comes to mind is just making sure that we're not trapped in busy work. It's this thing that can just creep up on us, and before we know it, we just are in firefighting mode all the time. And actually sometimes that's just the case because the organisation is operating in that very reactive firefighting mode. But sometimes it's a little trick that our mind plays on us, that, you know, we're making excuses of not getting to the really important projects because actually our time is needed here. It's needed in the email responses, it's needed in all the meetings that we need to attend, it's needed in all these other things, and it feels like we're needed and we're constantly doing something and we're busy. And even though we know that that's exhausting us, it's hard to pull ourselves away from it and work on the stuff that's most important. So this is true for things like, for example, how we manage our email inboxes, or whatever means that we have of messaging each other these days in this digital world. And I think for me, you know, I used to be in my first job really a slave to my email, right? I was constantly in this state of I was away from my desk for long periods, doing a lot of high volume recruitment. And when I would come back to my desk and I would see that lots of people are vying for my attention and I knew I didn't have time to respond, I was quite guilty for, I've read an email, I know what to do with it, but I don't have time to respond, so I'm just going to mark it as unread and I'm going to come back to it a little bit later on. And then later on, you've got more emails that have come through, and you're actually, I'm slowing myself down when I do that because I already knew what to do with it, and now I'm having to reread it, plus read through all the new ones that I have, and redecide what I'm doing when, I've already made that decision. And what I have to actually do is just create an action for myself, turn that email into an action, and then when I come to my action list, I'm just executing on the decisions that I've already made before, so that I'm not having this revolving 1,000 plus unread emails at any one time. And yes, it was that bad in that job for me at that time. So email is one thing that we can work on as individuals. What else can we do? I spoke about meeting etiquette, right? So when it comes to meetings, let me just write this down. Oh, I don't think I know how to spell etiquette. Let's see if that works. Meeting etiquette. How many people, hands up if you're watching this, I can't see you, but hands up if you're guilty of having so many back-to-back meetings, typically that are recurring in nature. So every project that you're working on has its own system of recurring meetings. Every person you're sort of collaborating with has its own set of recurring meetings. So guilty of this. And I think what's really helpful as a team is if you can have a bit of a reset and be brave and maybe take some of those recurring meetings out of the calendar and then only putting back in the calendar what really needs to happen. Those meetings where you really do need to come together and work on something together or make decisions on something together. We turn up to these meetings all the time. The ones, right, where there's no agenda, there's a very loose agenda. You just turn up and you just check in. And then maybe some of the team haven't dialed in and you don't know their whereabouts because everybody goes, nothing happens on this call, so why am I showing up? And then the meeting organizer says, right, I don't think we've got anything to discuss today. You've all got, 30 minutes back in your calendar. And it's so frustrating, right? Because you could have just had that half hour in your calendar already. So, you don't need to turn up to meetings you need as much time as you can to be able to actually get the work done that you need to get done. So I think a bit of a reset on meetings, but also just how you're running meetings. Are you coming together to make a decision? Are you coming together to collaborate on something? Or is it just an unstructured free-for-all, and really being able to challenge those unstructured free-for-alls and having something much more organised in place for when you need to come together as a group and do work together. So what about what we can do from an organisational level, right? So I'm going to pop these on these nice mint green stickies. I think what helps in this time management space and what leadership teams can do is help people realign on priorities. Okay, so you've got this realignment of priorities. This is so important because as we continue to grow and as we continue to take on new projects, it's very hard to know what we need to stop doing or do less of. And so we tend to do our current workload and then it grows and then it just grows and grows and grows. And there's no real, messaging that comes from leadership around this is our new focus, which means we're going to align our efforts here, and it means we can actually stop doing less of this. Now, I know it's really easy for me to sit here, right, and say, just stop doing things, do less of things. No, obviously, everything that we do in an organisation has an impact. What I think is really helpful here are some structured workshops or sessions with leaders and their teams that you're able to really quantify what are all the different things that are vying for our attention, but ultimately what direction are we headed in to grow the organisation? And so what are some of the trade-offs and the difficult decisions that we need to make together as a group that will allow us to manage the workload with the resources that we have? But then within that, right, so you have this realignment of priorities. and getting people on the same page. But within that, you can be clever around what are some of the things that could potentially be outsourced. So within these sort of prioritization sessions, is there routine work, repetitive work? Are there some one-off projects that you can engage companies or freelancers to come in and help you deliver that piece of work? That it means that your core staff are working on the future and the more important projects, and you're able to outsource some of that stuff where there's plenty of organisations that have the cavalry in place that can help you achieve that. But what's also really interesting in this space for organisations to look at when it comes to the resourcing within the organisation, it's looking at the talent retention approach, right? So metrics like turnover of staff, and including a metric that we used in my first organisation many years ago now, was a metric of who is leaving the organisation within the first 6 months. And that indicates, if you've got this revolving door of talent, lots of people are leaving you, you've constantly got vacancies at any one time, that also has an impact on the time management and the ability of people to get the most important stuff done. So what does that suggest that you need to be doing if there's a disconnect, right? If people are leaving you anyway, that there's potentially a deeper problem that you need to look at. If they're leaving en masse, it's natural for people to move on and to progress, and it's healthy. But if you have a problem with it, what is the core root of that problem? And if it's within 6 months, there's clearly a disconnect that's going on with either the expectations that the candidate had of the role are not being fulfilled in one way or another, whether it's the job has been missold, or the onboarding process really sucked, or the management practices are not really flexible, or just not really sort of appealing. People come in and they see that it's a very different picture than what they were sold at the interview. So there's so much more that we can do when people feel like they're in that churning space, but this is just a flavour of some of the things and some of the tactics that we can deploy when people are in this zone so that they don't slip into the sand. Okay, so I mentioned that the team that I most recently worked with on this particular workshop, 15% of them said that they were already in this sand. They were stuck in the quicksand. So when we're in this situation, the tactics to be deployed very much become a need of survival. So it becomes survival tactics. It's obviously a zone that we want to avoid, but as I say, life happens to us, things happen to us that inevitably we're sometimes weathering personal crises, or situations are happening to us at work that have created some stress, and we end up in this zone, right? Where we've got super low well-being, super low performance output because we just need to survive. So what are some of the things that we can do on a personal level? On a personal level, the first thing, if somebody has maybe just got, 1 foot in the sand and they could potentially still step out and help themselves out of the sand, the first thing that I really encourage people to look at is looking at optimizing sleep. So being able to ensure that we are getting a good night's sleep is so crucial to our performance and our well-being, right? It's that reset that we get the opportunity to do every single night. And I was a master sleep procrastinator, back in those recruitment days when I'd been performing all day and so exhausted and spoken to, sometimes hundreds of people in one day with the volume of recruitment that we were doing. And when I got home and I was in that sanctuary and I was in that space for me, and, I just wanted to grasp onto that for as long as I could, right? Because I knew that when I woke up the next day, I was straight back into the busyness and the hectic schedule of the day. And don't get me wrong, I loved this job, it was brilliant. But the other side of it is that we stop looking after ourselves. And so what was really important for me, the best thing I could have actually done, instead of self-sabotaging and prolonging this sleep procrastination, was just get a good night's sleep and just re-energize myself. I was sick all the time, and there's lots of research that shows that when we're tired, we're more likely to pick up colds and viruses and all the rest of it. And that was my life in that role. I was super flat out, constantly churning, but from time to time was in the sand, and I really wasn't well from time to time. And you just sort of try and persevere and work through that, and that's a definite path to burnout. So optimizing sleep and really being able to do the maths on, based on what time I need to get up, am I doing a wind down routine and giving myself enough hours to actually get sufficient sleep? But then what's that sleep quality like? Am I limiting things like caffeine? Am I cutting that off early enough in the afternoon latest, so that I've not got things like chocolate? I think even dark chocolate, there's caffeine in dark chocolate. So thinking about what am I ingesting for dinner, and is it stuff and sugar and all the rest of it that's actually preventing me from falling asleep? And that goes for alcohol as well, being able to cut that off early enough so that we are not disrupting the quality of our sleep. Okay, what else can we do in this zone? And I think when it comes to individuals, but also when it comes to the organisation, if someone is a bit deeper into the sand, we need the experts, right? So this becomes the counsellors, it becomes the medics in some cases, and it becomes the coaches, who are the professionals that can help us to get back on track, that can really meet us where we are with whatever crisis we're trying to weather, whether it's financial hardship, whether it's relationship breakdown, whether it's work-related stress. Who are the people that we can rely on to help us out of that? And from an organisational perspective, of course, this becomes, what are you doing to provide this support? Whether that's part of employee assistance programs, partnerships that you have, or looking at the resources that are available within your local governments and councils that can help people. You've got that care pack for people that you can deploy as soon as people are in this space. But when people are in this space, what is also playing out in the organisation is a lot of conflict. This is the space of misunderstandings, disagreement with colleagues, grievances, discipline action. All of this sort of stuff comes up when people are in this space of stress. And, one of the most important things that organisations therefore need to do is conflict resolution. And of course, to prevent it getting as far as people raising formal grievances and having formal disciplines and all that sort of stuff, it becomes so important for organisations to really consider, well, what are we doing to prevent conflict in the first place? And that speaks to a few of the things we've already spoken about in the churning space. Making sure people are really clear on priorities, making sure people are well rested between projects, and just making sure as well, what's the quality of recruitment like for the people you appoint as managers, and what's the support that you give to managers, which can be a very lonely role in being able to manage conflict and nip issues in the bud before they just escalate into these really unmanageable situations. So conflict prevention becomes easier when you're not in the crisis. Conflict resolution becomes the thing that you have to do when people are in this space. And of course, that is time consuming for all involved. And the more that you can then do to look at your longer term strategy of how you're actually minimising the run-ins that happen in the workplace. What are you doing around building relationships effectively in the workplace, and training people and guiding people around that is so crucial and so important at this stage. And I mentioned there the importance of being able to rest after quite intensive projects. And so that brings me to the next zone on this matrix, which is the space of cruising. And in the team that I last spoke with, 5% of the team said that they were in here. So it's the space of well-being is quite high, but performance output is quite low, and that might be typically because we are placing ourselves in intentional rest. But it also might be because we've been in this zone for too long, and actually we've become a bit complacent, we've become a little bit bored, disconnected from purpose. So some of the tactics that we can deploy for ourselves in this zone really fit around energy replenishment, and then from an organisational perspective, being able to reignite that fire in your colleagues around what they're here to actually do. So this is the zone of rest and recovery, and it's a really wonderful zone to be in, but a very hard one to place ourselves in because we're in this constant striving space in our world. So what can we do here? On a personal level, this is the space to reconnect with the things that we just get enjoyment from. What are the things that bring us some joy? So things like reconnecting with hobbies and reconnecting with the things that just overall nourish us and feed our well-being. This is the time to reconnect with what those activities are. It might also be an opportunity for us to consider what might be some of the things that we find most meaningful in life. So what is our purpose, and how can we perhaps do something or do more of the things that lead to a more meaningful life? And that takes a bit of self-reflection, and this is what I mean by not becoming complacent and bored. If we can think about what's the greater good of what it is that you want to do in life, how can you do more of that? And that does take a bit of time sometimes for that to emerge. And one of the books that I love that really helps with this, two books that I love actually, Ikigai, which was recommended to me by an old colleague and somebody that I was mentoring at the time. I learned so much from him, more than he learned from me, I think. And this book is around being able to find that sweet spot between what you're good at, what you can be paid for, you know, what you love to do. There's one other quadrant that can't come to mind right now, but it's finding that sweet spot. Oh, what the world needs, that's what it is. And it's finding that, you know, what's the thing that sort of connects all four of those areas that you can contribute to your life and to the world. And the other book that I love is Flow, which is all about creating more time for those activities where time just becomes, you know, obsolete. It's where you're really in the zone. It's that sweet spot between the right level of challenge versus the skill that you have. And so it's not too challenging that you become frustrated and lose heart. And it's not, you know, really low of a challenge, too low of a challenge that you become bored. So those are the two books that I recommend on a personal level to really sort of think about what do you want to do in the world, and how do you make time for the things, you know, what are the flow states that you can achieve in this space. From a company perspective, what I think is really helpful are things like intentional time out from the day-to-day work for the team to come together in an off-site environment to connect as a team a little bit more, and maybe start to look at creative solutions for some of the challenges that are ongoing. So definitely things like team retreats or team events. You know, what are those moments where you're bringing people together for connection that's not all about the work, that will set the scene for work to become a bit more you know, easier and more enjoyable in solving some of those bigger challenges. And within that as well, I'm going to put purpose within the organisation's side too, because I think when it comes to purpose, organisations can also do a lot to really align people around, these are our goals, this is our strategy, what are we doing as a team to, you know, move us towards those goals. And there's workshops and strong facilitation that can come into this topic as well. That leads us then, if we're able to deploy those tactics quite well of, you know, we've diagnosed, we're churning, we are doing some time management tactics to help us out of that, we're trying to prevent going into the quicksand, but when we are there, what is the robust toolkit of support that we have for ourselves and for individuals that will help them come out of the sand? And then when we're in that R&R space, what's some of the things that we can do that we're not having to perform at a full flat out rate. We're more focusing on how do we recharge, and we're topping up our well-being, but we're starting to think about what's that journey to getting back to performance. And that leads to the final zone, which is this space of flourishing. And in the workshop that I was in, there was 5% of the group that said they were here. And that leaves another 5% that said that they actually weren't sure. 5% said not quite sure yet which zone they felt their energy was in. So back to flourishing. I want to start this one. This is like high well-being, high performance, firing on all cylinders, what we're like at our best. And there's a misconception here that this is the goal. The goal is to flourish, and it's not a realistic goal. And this is why, organizations are so obsessed with top performance, high performance. We need to always do more, be more. Yes, all of that is important, but you cannot overlook this well-being element that's so crucial, and this finite energy that we have, and life that inevitably happens to each one of us, including stuff that happens outside of our control, like pandemics, like cost of living crises, all of these other variable factors that really impact on organisational life, either directly or indirectly. It's not realistic to constantly flourish. And when we're in this space, we're probably most accessible to future-proofing. So the tactics to deploy in the flourishing zone is preparing for the fall, right? The inevitable fall that will come with some form of crisis, whether it's personal or whether it's in the environment, the external environment. This is the time to future-proof our personal skills, but also future-proof the organisation to be able to weather these upcoming challenges that we may not even know are coming our way yet. So this is the zone of the level up space. And from an individual perspective, this is a really good opportunity perhaps to embark on some of those bigger qualifications, right? So let me just write this down. Some qualifications are going to be helpful on a personal level to perhaps pursue when you're in this space. Perhaps these will be accessible in the cruising zone as well, but really when you're sort of thriving, this is the time to embark on these sorts of projects. What also becomes accessible to people in this zone is the deep transformational work. And this is stuff like perhaps what builds our self-awareness and what builds our compassion for others, things like mindfulness programs, things like resilience building. This is doing the deep transformational work on ourselves so that when we perhaps are faced with challenges and setbacks, the impact of these are maybe not as severe, but that when we are in those situations, maybe we're thrust into the quicksand, then we are able to recover from that much more easily and much faster than before. So being able to do this deep transformational work on ourselves, the time to do it where it's going to be more accessible is when we're flourishing. And this is why I'm not a fan of mandatory training in organisations, because if you're trying to railroad somebody through a program that they're just not accessible for, when you're in survival mode and you're stuck in the sand, it's not the time to embark on an 8-week mindfulness program. It's probably not accessible to you, and it's not to say that those tools won't help you, because there will be people in that zone that of course that will help. What I'm saying is it's likely that those sorts of programs are just not accessible to you. You're not in the energy space to receive that sort of self-awareness and guidance forward. So the time to perhaps do that is when you're already flourishing, so that you can future-proof your well-being for any challenges that might come your way after. From an organisational perspective, this is the time to look at your crisis response strategies. So what is your planning for the next COVID? What's your planning for the crises that people in organisations face all the time, and how are you building that into the experience that employees have? The crisis response is so important in being able to demonstrate that you can collectively notice suffering in organisations when it happens. So how robust are the listening systems that you're setting up in the organisation? How transparent are they? How accessible are they for people to use? And what are you actually doing when you get feedback? How visible and transparent is that when you hear that colleagues are going through a particular challenge? What are you actually doing to remedy those challenges? And that's where things like annual employee surveys just don't work. They're not agile enough and they're not fast enough to really address the challenges that people have. What are you doing then to collectively notice and to collectively feel as an organisation, right? These are human moments. What are we doing to demonstrate that we understand on a human level and we really feel when people are going through a crisis? Because when we can really feel and come to that connectedness that we have as human beings, instead of the separateness that exists for a lot of us in organisations, departments that hate each other, colleagues that fall out all the time, you're all there for the greater good of the organisation. And when we can get to a point where we can truly recognise that, then we're much more motivated to want to collectively respond when people are going through difficult times. So spending some time in this zone, really thinking about what's our aligned approach as a management group when somebody comes to us in a time of need. It shouldn't be the default stance of, I don't really believe that you're unwell. Just have a human response on what it is that somebody is going through. So when we're flourishing from an organisational point of view, it's the best time to be able to come up with those strategies that will help weather those challenges and just kickstart a strategy that will help people through the hard times in the organisation. So when we're flourishing, it's the ideal time. We know how hard it was trying to create strategies to help people when we were in the thick of COVID. So prevent that by coming up with a crisis response strategy in advance, considering what are the resources that are going to be needed in times of crisis, who are the key people that need to be a part of that process, and how can you co-create and co-design something much more creative when it comes to your business challenges. So the space of flourishing is also a time to be able to, when it comes to level up, what are some of those biggest challenges in the organisation that are preventing you from growth, and how can you come together and collaborate in a much more creative way? You're in that creative space now where you can really solve some of the company's biggest challenges. So that is the Wellbeing Performance Matrix. I absolutely love this as a complement to designing employee experiences that improve working lives for people in organisations, that make work enjoyable, that remove obstacles and barriers to progress, and ultimately help us to kind of manage our energy and keep us moving. And the goal here is not to always flourish, because it's not realistic. The goal is to not stay in any one zone for too long. We need to, when we're in the flourishing zone, intentionally remember to take some time out and spend some time cruising, so that we can top up and recharge and come back ready for the next set of challenges that are coming our way. I hope you enjoyed this. I am an HR professional and I run workshops on improving the employee experience in organisations. Follow for more.